Hey everyone, God bless you. Thanks so much for tuning in. I've written a reflection for you today entitled Joseph Stalin, Architect of Death. I recently posted some thoughts on the mega crisis of digital pornography addiction in our culture, using as a springboard the interview of Tucker Carlson with Nick Fuentes. This interview, especially the portion dedicated to the subject of pornography, I used in a way to bring to your attention just how critical this is. This is one of the great, what shall I call it, central spiritual cancers of our dying culture, literally killing our society. It's the Death Star together with abortion and fornication that is literally killing the secular West. It's nothing like vegetarianism or some minor matter. This is life and death in ways that our society has never seen it before. Mr. Fuentes, in that interview with Tucker, made a provocative comment that to me was completely out of the blue, in which he mentioned that he was a fan of Stalin.
It's actually funny. It was December 18th. I remember because that's an important date to me. And it's Joseph Stalin's birthday.
Oh.
I'm a fan.
You're a fan of Stalin's?
Mm-hmm. I was an admirer, but we don't need to go into that, I guess.
Well, that's, okay, let's get back to it. We'll circle back to that.
It was weird.
There are a couple things I do regret, I'll just say. He said, I love Stalin. I was so shocked by that as someone who spent his whole life studying Stalin. It's actually one of my true areas of personal interest, know a lot about the topic. How could you like Stalin, But I didn't get back to that.
If someone is a fan of Stalin, they are a fan of evil. So I'd like to speak a little bit about Joseph Stalin right now. And I'm just hoping that comment was just a provocative but untrue statement. Everyone, I'm recording this reflection on Stalin, Architect of Death and Antichrist of the 21st century, on Tuesday, the 4th of November, the day on which New York City is holding its mayoral election. And it appears that the front runner is Zoran Mamdani, who is a self-proclaimed democratic socialist, not far at all from Stalin's political and economic views. That's interesting. Joseph Stalin is one of the hideous antichrists of the 20th century, whose investment in societal evil we're still living with very much today. The 20th century was the bloodiest century in the history of the human race. The century of centuries for Christian martyrdom, especially for us Orthodox Christians. We lost more. We gave to Christ more martyrs and shed more martyric blood in the 20th century than in all the other centuries. Not even close. It was a century dominated by vicious and bloodthirsty tyrants, fueled by a collage of grotesque and dehumanizing and universally anti-God ideologies, some of which have refused to die, though their major proponents are dead. People like Stalin, Mao, Mussolini, Kim Il-sung, Ceausescu, Mengistu, Hitler, and Pol Pot. What a century the 20th century was. Good riddance. Good riddance. We ought to have the conviction as Christian people that the more light we can shine on the darkness, the more exposure we can make of these demonic ideas and tyrannical personages of the 20th century, the greater chance we will be able to avoid them both in the future and protect other people from falling into these traps. Christians are called by God not only to embrace and live the true faith, but we're also called to oppose satanic ideology and antichrists to, in the words of St. John, test the spirits by the gospel and reveal the truth to every age. This is the call of the church. So give me your mind and your hearts just for a minute so that I can speak to you about Stalin. Joseph Bessarion Yugosvili, that is Stalin. I'll tell you where he got that name, Stalin, later. Was born in the town of Gori in the nation of Georgia, which was then a part of the Russian Empire, on December the 6th, St. Nicholas Day, 1878, about 55 miles northwest of Tbilisi. Gori was populated by about 20,000 Georgians and Armenians, Russians, and Jews. He was baptized, yes. He was baptized an Orthodox Christian on December 29th. He was the only child of his parents, Bessarion, and Ketivan, who survived infancy. Other siblings died. His father was a successful shoemaker, but became tragically an alcoholic, fell into poverty, and became very abusive and violent. Like Hitler, Stalin had a terrible relationship with his father, who was neglectful and abusive. By 1883, Joseph and his mother had become virtual vagabonds. In 1886, they were given shelter by a Georgian Orthodox priest, Father Christopher Charkviani. This would be the first of many gracious acts of the church to Stalin and his mother. His mother, Katerina, worked as a house cleaner and a launderer and was determined to send her son to school. And in September of 1888, Stalin enrolled at the Gory Church School. He had a position there and was supported by Father Christopher again. Yet another incredible investment by this priest in the young Stalin's life. Although he got into many fights, Stalin excelled academically, displaying talent in painting and drama classes, writing his own poetry, singing as a choir boy. He faced severe health problems while he was there. In 1884, he had a smallpox infection that left him with pox scars on his face. And at age 12, he was seriously injured after being hit by a carriage, which was likely the cause of a lifetime disability with his left arm. In 1894, Stalin began his studies in Tbilisi at the seminary. Yes, baptized, raised in the church, supported graciously by his parish priest, sent to seminary. This Antichrist enrolled in seminary and joined 600 other young seminarians who were boarding at the seminary. He was known for his great love of church hymns. In fact, even after becoming a godless man, a vicious and cruel atheist and persecutor of people, and especially of the church, he sang church hymns his entire life. He still found pleasure in singing them. Poor man. One of his fellow seminarians remembered that he was, quote, very devout, always on time for the divine services, and explained their meeting to the younger generation of students. He received top marks in his studies of Old Testament, New Testament, catechism, liturgy, and church music. Can you imagine? Baptism, loving economic assistance, education provided by the school, by the church, by a priest who loved him, seminary, formed in the singing of the church. And then he abandoned his faith, became an apostate, and embraced atheism. He lost interest in his priestly studies, his grades dropped, and he was repeatedly confined to a cell for being a troublemaker. The seminary's journal noted that he declared himself an atheist and stalked out of prayers and refused to pay any respect to the priests or monks. He joined a forbidden book club at the school. He adopted the name Koba from the bandit protagonist in one of the forbidden books called The Patricide. He was taken by Karl Marx's works. He left the seminary in April of 1899 at the age of 20, and he never returned. I really wonder if he was engaging with any of his professors in the works of Karl Marx. I think this is one of the important things that we Christian educators must always do, is be reading even the dark works of influential contemporaries, to know their works from the inside out in order to be able to address them and not shelter our students improperly. Let me say a little bit about his early political agitation and imprisonment. In October of 1899, Stalin began to work as a meteorologist in Tbilisi at the observatory. He attracted a group of supporters through his classes on socialist theory. He began to co-organize a secret workers' mass meeting for May Day of 1900, at which he successfully encouraged many of the men to strike. By this time, the Empire secret police were aware of Stalin's activities with the Tbilisi revolutionary milieu going on. They attempted to arrest him in March of 1901, but he escaped and he went into hiding. And this was the beginning of the years of multiple arrests for him and escapes. He remained underground. He helped plan demonstrations for May Day of 1901, in which 3,000 marchers clashed with the authorities. In November of that year, he was elected to the Tbilisi Committee on the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, which was a Marxist party that had been founded in 1898. He organized strikes, public demonstrations, and attempted to storm the prison in Batumi. This is in the western part of Georgia, right on the Black Sea. He was arrested and held in Batumi and sentenced to 3 years in exile in Siberia, but he escaped in January of 1904 and returned to Tbilisi. Stalin first met Vladimir Lenin, who would become his mentor in 1905 when Stalin was 26. This was a time where unrest was breaking out across the Russian Empire. In November of 1905, the Georgian Bolsheviks elected Stalin as one of their delegates to the Bolshevik conference in St. Petersburg. Stalin and Lenin developed a good relationship, and Stalin held Lenin in deep respect, but he thought Lenin was way too mellow. He was vocal in his disagreement with Lenin's views that the Bolsheviks should actually field candidates for the election to the State Duma. Stalin, in fact, had no time for elections or the parliamentary process. He thought it was a complete waste of time. Does that sound familiar to you? It should. It should. When people are constantly blaming the elections because they don't like the outcomes of the elections. I'm not talking about opposing rigged elections. We have to have honest elections. But tyrants don't like elections unless they go their way. And that was definitely the way of Joseph Stalin. Striking ideological commitment shared by many tyrants. For all of Stalin's verbal support about the common man, he certainly didn't want the common man to have any practical say in government. The Bolshevik cause at this time was funded by theft, by robberies, and this was a policy that Lenin and Stalin both were fully aware of and supportive of. Though he was an atheist by this time and a Marxist agitator, he still wanted to marry a pious Orthodox woman, which he did. Got married in the church in the what's called the old cathedral today in Tbilisi, the Sioni Cathedral, the Zion Cathedral, July of 1906. This is the cathedral very famous now in the West because it's associated with the life of St. Gabriel the Fool for Christ, whose feast was just a couple days ago. May St. Gabriel pray for us. Numerous witnesses at the wedding were actually failed seminarians turned Marxists. The Tamada who led the feast afterwards was the oldest Bolshevik in Georgia. In March of 1907, his wife bore a son, Yakov. Stalin's biographer, Volkogonov, wrote that Ekaterina, his wife, was, quote, probably the one human being Stalin truly loved, unquote. Stalin said that upon her death, this creature softened my heart of stone. She passed away, and with her has gone my last warm feelings for people. There you have it. There you have it. Well, what a great leader. He loves one person in the world, and with her gone, his heart of stone, his own self-description, could take full reign because he has lost all warm feelings for people. Stalin then laid his right hand across his chest when he said this, and he declared, in here, everything is so empty, so unutterably hollow. What a commentary on what atheism produces. Shallow hearts. One of his friends at the time concluded, quote, I expressed my condolences to Koba. It was honestly and sincerely offered as I could do it, but I knew that thereafter he was bereft of any moral restraint and that he would from then onward surrender himself entirely to his fantastic plans, which were dictated solely by ambition and vengeance. This sentiment was echoed similarly later by one of Stalin's comrades, Trotsky, who said, quote, Stalin admitted that he found the greatest joy in life closely observing some enemy of his, painstakingly preparing each step, taking merciless revenge on him, and then going to sleep. So here we have it, dear ones, a window into the heart of an atheist tyrant. Evil proceeds out of the heart, our Savior says. This is why we labor to purify the heart, because if we purify the heart, then our thoughts, our words, our actions will be pure. Poor Stalin. Stalin organized the robbing of a large delivery of money to the Imperial Bank in June of 1907. His thugs ambushed the armed convoy with gunfire and homemade bombs. Around 40 people were killed, but all of his gang escaped alive. After the heist, Stalin settled in Baku with his wife and son. In November of 1907, his wife died of typhus and left his son they left their son with her family in Tbilisi. He didn't want to raise him. Didn't think he could. In Baku, he ran all sort of protection rackets, counterfeited currency, carried out robberies, kidnapped the children of several wealthy figures to extract ransom money. In March of 1908, Stalin was arrested and interred in the Bailov prison in Baku. In March, He led the imprisoned Bolsheviks. He organized discussion groups. He ordered the killing of suspected informants. He was eventually sentenced to 2 years of exile in the Vologda province. But later that year, he escaped and made it to the town of Kotlas, disguised as a woman, and from there went to St. Petersburg. In 1910, in March, he was arrested again, and during his confinement, shacked up with a number of women, including his landlady, Maria Kuzakova, who later gave birth to a second child for him. And this was the time that he really came to prominence and came into great power. Lenin and Zinoviev appointed Stalin to the Central Committee in January of 1912, a position that he retained his whole entire life. He was tasked with editing the new daily communist paper, the Pravda, the Truth. Ouch. Stalin was tasked by Lenin with writing about the empire's minority ethnicities. He published his most famous work, Marxism and the National Question, under the pseudonym K. Stalin, from the word stal, which means steel. A commentary on his heart, no doubt. He was arrested again and sent to prison near the Arctic Circle, having escaped so many times before. In a hamlet there, he had a relationship with a 13-year-old girl named Lydia, who gave birth to 2 children with Stalin. So he's siring more kids. And in 1917, when the communist revolution broke out in the empire and the Tsar abdicated, Stalin wrote this in Pravda. He said, "The existing government of landlords and capitalists must be replaced by a new government, a government of workers and peasants. The existing pseudo-government, which was not elected by the people and which is not accountable to the people, must be replaced by a government recognized by the people, elected by representatives of the workers, soldiers, and peasants, and held accountable to their representatives." It's amazing, isn't it? The tyrants then and now love to talk about elections, love to talk about the people, but in fact, never respect the decisions of the people. These words justifying the Marxist revolution of 1917 had absolutely no relevance to what Lenin and Stalin were actually doing, what they were created. They were never elected or accountable to the people, nor did they ever intend to be. In October, Lenin, Stalin, and other leading Bolsheviks organized a coup to topple the provisional government. A Bolshevik militia seized Petrograd's electric power station, its main post office, state bank, telephone exchange, and several bridges. A Bolshevik-controlled ship, the Aurora, opened fire on the Winter Palace. The provisional government's assembled delegates surrendered and were arrested by the Bolsheviks. And on October 26th, Lenin declared himself the chairman of a new government, the Council of People's Commissars. Although not so publicly well known as Lenin or Trotsky, Stalin's importance at this time amongst the Bolsheviks was growing like crazy. He co-signed Lenin's decrees, shutting down hostile newspapers, censorship, one of the clearest red flags that a country is moving to dictatorship. It's happening all over Western Europe, especially in England, and we know it here in America so viciously during the COVID period. Still wonder if we've tamped it out and crushed it. He co-chaired the sessions of the committee drafting a constitution for the new Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. He strongly supported Lenin's formation of the Cheka Security Service and the Red Terror that it would propagate. And he was appointed the People's Commissar for Nationalities. Then the Bolsheviks won the ensuing Russian Civil War. By the end of 1919, Lenin and Stalin were living in the Kremlin. Stalin was in charge of the food requisitioning program. In 1922, Lenin nominated Stalin as the party's new general secretary. In May of 1922, a massive stroke left Lenin partially paralyzed, and he died in January of 24. And Stalin took charge of the funeral and was one of the pallbearers. Against the wishes of Lenin's widow, the Politburo bombed Lenin's corpse and placed it within a mausoleum in Moscow's Red Square, where sadly, grotesquely, it remains to this day. It was incorporated into a growing personality cult devoted to Lenin, with Petrograd being named Leningrad that year. To bolster his image as a devout Leninist, Stalin gave 9 lectures at the university on the, quote, foundations of Leninism. He published this later in a book. As general secretary, Stalin had had a free hand in making appointments to his own staff, implementing his loyalists everywhere. His wife gave birth to their daughter Svetlana in 1926. Stalin moved aggressively, this is his new wife, Stalin moved aggressively against other leading Bolsheviks. Kamenev, Zinoviev, Trotsky, Bukharin. It's an irony, really, that Stalin promoted Bolshevism as the rule of the proletariat while it was formed by an oligarchy that quickly devolved into a dictatorship so strict and so severe that Stalin murdered all his original Bolshevik comrade leaders. Just killed them all. He then launched into tyrannical and murderous policies, which would be expressed through the rest of his rule. Of course, remember, he was an experienced bandit. He would now use virtually unlimited power to kill and steal in an effort to solve the USSR's economic, military, and social problems. He targeted his own father's class, a class of hardworking former peasants, the kulaks. These were former serfs who had worked their way into small land holdings. This was not the 1%. These were not these Silicon Valley tech tyrants. In January of 1930, the Politburo approved the liquidation of the kulak class. Within 6 months, more than 320,000 kulak households had been devastated. Their assets, properties, farms, and food seized. This was the beginning of a massive terror campaign that Stalin would drive against his own people off and on consistently until his death in 1953. In 1929, the Politburo announced the mass collectivization of agriculture. But if you refused to join them, you would be accused of being a bourgeois kulak. You had to turn over your lands. By 1936, 90% of all farms were collectivized. Private property was seized by the state. Output predictably plummeted. Famine broke out. Major famine in the winter of 1932 and 1933. Between 5 and 7 million people died of famine. Ukraine suffering the most. And Stalin, of course, denying that there was a famine. We could go in great detail into the many political and military purges that Stalin orchestrated to remove anti-Soviet elements of society. And in 1937, in a single month, 268,950 people were arrested and some 75,950 people were executed. The years of the Great Purge, those numbers reached 1.6 million and arrested 700,000 shot. Brutal, just brutal. Even after World War II, after Russia had given so much blood, lost millions and millions of soldiers and people as well, 8 million, I think, soldiers and in the 20s of millions of people. Still, when the soldiers who survived came home, Stalin put 50% of them into prison camps, afraid that they had been poisoned by being amongst the Germans, etc., and the English. Let me say a word about the Gulag and then end with his few words about his persecution, specifically of priests in the church. Just how atrocious and murderous Stalin's rule has been exposed to posterity by the monumental work of Alexander Solzhenitsyn in his Gulag Archipelago. When Stalin died in 1953, some 3% of the entire USSR population was in the Gulag. And those numbers are said to be way down from earlier periods of Stalin's rule, like in the late 1930s. Today in America, we know that we have far too many people in prison, also in prison for really ridiculous reasons. But even when we complain about that and having such a high percentage of the populace, I think the highest we've reached is 0.7, 0.7% of the population behind bars. Stalin's last year in power had between 4 and 5 times that many people. Solzhenitsyn considered all the dark lies of Soviet oppression to be weaker than what he said was one word of truth. His truth-telling brought down a satanic empire. One of the central themes of Alexander Solzhenitsyn's archipelago, the Gulag Archipelago, is the notion that the line between good and evil cannot be externalized, but it runs through the middle of every human heart. He argued that it was the greatest insolence to decide that we don't have to answer for the evils of the world. What a word. What a word. You see the greatest evil of Stalin in his attacks on the church. Besides his plans to extinguish the kulaks, his political opponents, dissidents, military opponents, he launched a radical and murderous anti-Christian purge, a declericalization, a plan to rid the country of churches, priests, and bishops. The government's anti-religious campaign was intense. He supported the League of Militant Atheists, persecuting clergy. From October 1917 until 1988, The Orthodox Church of Russia existed in a perpetual state of siege. For 70 years, the state considered religious faith to be an error, to be repressed and extirpated. The persecution against the church was so intense, there is no parallel in Christian history. It left in its train the largest number of Christian martyrs in 20 centuries. The church in 1918 was excluded from all participation in the education system. Its properties were confiscated, evangelism forbidden, public charity and social work by the church forbidden. The few churches that remained open were mostly for show, to hide the oppressive anti-religious tactics of the state. No publishing was permitted by the church. Parishes could not maintain libraries. Few Bibles existed. Every ordained bishop and priest required permission from the state to function and was closely watched by the secret police. Everyone who came to the church for a baptism, wedding, confession, or to talk with the priest was watched, recorded, and spied upon. All school teachers were not only required to be atheists, but to promote atheistic propaganda. The beginning of the school day came over the loudspeaker, quote, "Good morning, there is no God." Tens of thousands of priests were murdered. Many lukewarm Christians deserted the church altogether into apostasy. Some Orthodox Christians tried to form the so-called living church, a mangled, compromised body acceptable to the atheistic government since it had no salt. And many saints and miracles shone forth, and the church continues to document them because there are so many valiant warriors for the kingdom of God who loved Christ above all and shed their blood even with peace. St. Tikhon, the Patriarch of Moscow, excommunicated and anathematized the Bolshevik leaders, and this action was confirmed by the All-Russian Council in February of 1918. It's never been revoked to this day. For years, having purged the faithful clergy, Stalin accepted a few deeply compromised bishops. And Alexander Solzhenitsyn would write to them in 1972 his, quote, Lenten letter to Patriarch Pimen. And this is what he said. By what reasoning is it possible to convince oneself that the planned destruction of the spirit and body of the church under the guidance of the atheists is the best way of preserving it? Rescuing it for whom? Certainly not for Christ. Preserving it by what means? By falsehood? But after the falsehood, by whose hands are the holy sacraments to be celebrated? What a word. What a word by Solzhenitsyn. Under Stalin, the church went from 54,000 church temples in 1914 to some hundreds in 1939. Priests and deacons from 51,000 to some hundreds. Monasteries from over 1,000 to zero. Monks and nuns from about 100,000 to none recorded, of course, many in hiding. Seminaries and theological academies from 61 to zero. Parish schools from 37,528 to none. Homes for the aged from 1,100 plus to forbidden by law. We'll end with Stalin's personal catastrophe. He faced many problems in his family life. In 1929, his son Yakov unsuccessfully attempted suicide. His relationship with Nadia was also strained amid their arguments and her mental health problems. In November of 1932, after a group dinner in the Kremlin in which Stalin was flirting with other women, Nadia shot herself to death. By the way, do the suicides in Stalin's family and Hitler's family remind you of their similarities? It should. Of course, publicly, the cause of her death was announced as appendicitis. Stalin also concealed the real cause of death from his children. They didn't know either. Stalin's friends said that he underwent a significant change following her suicide, becoming emotionally harder, if that can be imagined. His last years involved growing suspicions and paranoia, including accusations against numerous of his doctors who were trying to save his health and his life, but who ended up being tortured and murdered, accused of plotting against him. On March 1st, 1953, Stalin was found semi-conscious on his bedroom floor, having suffered a cerebral hemorrhage, and he died on March 5th, was embalmed and placed on display in Moscow. He was buried in Lenin's mausoleum, and a new purge took place targeting those who celebrated Stalin's death. Doesn't that sound very much like what's happening today with all the surveillance on the internet? People getting arrested because they responded a certain way to some happening? Very evil. Unlike Hitler, who built his dictatorship by oratory, Stalin was a political schemer who used terror to protect his power and offset his inability to speak well and his small stature. He was only 5'4". Like Hitler, he stayed up late, he slept away the morning, he worked in darkness literally and spiritually. He was without compassion, he was vengeful and resentful. He held grudges for years and would often plumb his guests with vodka in hopes that their loose tongues would reveal some indiscretion and secret plans or thoughts against him. Those who knew him best said that his greatest delight was to exact a well-planned vengeance on an enemy. Nothing made him sleep better. Well, he's not sleeping peacefully now. This is Stalin, dear ones. We are locked in a very serious catechetical war right now in the secular West. The church versus a host of satanic ideologies. This war for the mind and the heart starts with God first, and then politics, and then other areas. Atheism first existed, and then communism. God is the target of these dark anti-human philosophies. Stalin, like Satan himself, knew the truth and lived in the light before apostatizing and spreading death far and wide. And it's the truth of the church's one and only universal creed that begins, I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth and of all things visible and invisible. It's the truth that will conquer darkness and tyrants and death. Our Lord Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. He is the one who says, if you abide in my word, and my word abides in you, then you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. I'm wearing, as I often do, this beautiful cross that I was given when I was a brand new priest by my spiritual father. In fact, it was from the last silver press of Tsar Nicholas II before his martyrdom. The Tsar would give these simple crosses to new priests in the Russian church. Martyrdom is the way of the church, and it leads to victory. Death cannot stop the church. Death cannot stop the truth. The church and the truth will stop death. She already is stopping death in millions and millions of people's lives, and more every day, putting an end to the reign of darkness. We continue to say that which the great hieromartyr Polycarp of Smyrna said in the 2nd century, when he waved his hands at those calling for his death, and he said, away with the atheists. We say the same. We say the same 20 centuries later. Down with the atheists. Joseph Stalin is the Antichrist, an Antichrist of the 20th century, an architect of death. I am not a fan. Please don't be one yourself. For more on the Antichrist of the 20th century lecture series I did some years ago, you can go to the Patristic Nectar App and find it there under Theological Lectures, where I cover many of the monsters of the 20th century. And many thanks to all of our generous donors to Patristic Nectar that enable us to have all of this material for free on the app. God be with you.
A very happy birthday to all of you, dear ones, which we commemorate.
Hungry for truth in a world full of noise? Download the Patristic Nectar app, a bridge to the timeless wisdom of the Orthodox Church. Whether you're at home, on a walk, or in the car, you'll have instant access to hundreds of hours of powerful sermons, saints, lectures, conference videos, and podcasts, all rooted in the teachings of the Christian faith. New content is added weekly, and best of all, everything is completely free. Join thousands of others growing in the faith every day. The Patristic Nectar app is completely free thanks to generous supporters. Download it today and consider helping us nourish others with the sweet teachings of the Holy Fathers.